The Online Freedom and Viewpoint Diversity Act would make important changes to right-size the liability shield and make clear what type of content moderation is protected. This legislation would address the challenges we have discussed while still leaving fundamentals of Section 230 in place. Although some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have characterized this as a purely partisan exercise, there is strong bipartisan support for reviewing Section 230. In fact, both presidential candidates, Trump and Biden, have proposed repealing Section 230 in its entirety, a position I have not yet embraced. I hope we can focus today's discussion on the issues that affect all Americans. Protecting a true diversity of viewpoints and free discourse is central to our way of life. I look forward to hearing from today's witnesses about what they are doing to promote transparency, accountability, and fairness in their content moderation processes. And I thank each of them for cooperating with us in the scheduling of this testimony. I now turn to my friend and ranking member, Senator Cantwell, for her opening remarks. Senator Cantwell.
The beautiful state of Washington in my Senate office here in Washington, D.C. Shows the various ecosystems of the state of Washington, which we very much appreciate. I bring that up because just recently the Seattle area was named the #1 STEM economy in the United States. That is the most STEM workforce in the United States of America. So these issues about how we harness the information age to work for us and not against us is something that we deal with every day of the week, and we want to have discussion and discourse. I believe that discussion and discourse today should be broader than just 230. There are issues of privacy that our committee has addressed and issues of how to make sure there is a free and competitive news market. I noticed today we're not calling in the NAB or the Publishers Association that you wish was more broadly distributed. To have the competition in the news market is to have a diversity of voices and diversity of opinion. And in my report just recently released, we show that true competition really does help perfect information, both for our economy and for the health of our democracy. So I do look forward to discussing these issues today. What I do not want today's hearing to be is a chilling effect on the very important aspects of making sure that hate speech or misinformation related to health and public safety are allowed to remain on the internet. We all know what happened in 2016, and we had reports from the FBI, our intelligence agencies, and a bipartisan Senate committee that concluded in 2016 that Russian operatives did, masquerading as Americans, use targeted advertisements, intentionally falsified news articles, self-generated content, social media platform tools to interact and attempt to deceive tens of millions of social media users in the United States. Director of National Intelligence, Republican former Senator Dan Coates said, quote, in July 2018, "The warning lights are blinking red, that the digital infrastructure that serves our country is literally under attack." So I take this issue very seriously and have had for many years. That is making sure, as the Mueller, Special Counsel Mueller indicated, 12 Russian intelligence officers hacked the DNC and various information detailing phishing attacks into our state election boards, online personas, and stealing documents. So when we had a subcommittee hearing and former Bush Homeland Security Director Michael Chertoff testified, I asked him point blank, because there were some of our colleagues who were saying, you know what, everybody does election interference. So I asked him if election interference was something that we did or should be encouraging. He responded that he agreed, quote, "Interfering with infrastructure or elections is completely off limits and unacceptable. That is why I believe that we should be working aggressively internationally to sanction anybody that interferes in our elections. So I hope today that we will get a report from the witnesses on exactly what they have been doing to clamp down on election interference. I hope that they will tell us what kind of hate speech and misinformation that they have taken off the books. It is no secret that there are various state actors who are doing all they can to take a whack at democracy, to try to say that our way of government, that our way of life, that our way of freedom of speech and information is somehow not as good as we have made it being the beacon of democracy around the globe. I am not going to let or tolerate people to continue to whack at our election process, our vote by mail system, or the ability of tech platforms
or remove content. They could be expansions to Section 230, new legislative frameworks, or a commitment to industry-wide self-regulation best practices. The first is requiring a services moderation process to be published. How are cases reported and reviewed? How are decisions made? What tools are used to enforce? Publishing answers to questions like these will make our process more robust and accountable to the people we serve. The second is requiring a straightforward process to appeal decisions made by humans or by algorithms. This ensures people can let us know when we don't get it right, so that we can fix any mistakes and make our processes better in the future. And finally, much of the content people see today is determined by algorithms, with very little visibility into how they choose what they show. We took a first step in making this more transparent by building a button to turn off our home timeline algorithms. It's a good start, but we're inspired by the market approach suggested by Dr. Stephen Wolfram before this committee in June 2019. Enabling people to choose algorithms created by third parties to rank and filter their content is an incredibly energizing idea that's in reach. Requiring 1, moderation process and practices to be published, 2, a straightforward process to appeal decisions, and 3, best efforts around algorithmic choice are suggestions to address the concerns we all have going forward. And they're all achievable in short order. It's critical as we consider these solutions, we optimize for new startups and independent developers. Doing so ensures a level playing field that increases the probability of competing ideas to help solve problems. We mustn't entrench the largest companies any further. Thank you for the time, and I look forward to a productive discussion to dig into these and other ideas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dorsey. We now call on Mr. Sundar Pichai. You are recognized for 5 minutes, sir.
Chairman Vicker, Ranking Member Cantwell, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. The internet has been a powerful force for good over the past 3 decades. It has radically improved access to information, whether it's connecting Americans to jobs, getting critical updates to people in times of crisis, or helping a parent find answers to questions like, how can I get my baby to sleep through the night? At the same time, people everywhere can use their voices to share new perspectives, express themselves, and reach broader audiences than ever before. Whether you're a barber in Mississippi or a home renovator in Indiana, you can share a video and build a global fan base and a successful business right from your living room. In this way, the internet has been one of the world's most important equalizers. Information can be shared and knowledge can flow from anyone to anywhere. The same low barriers to entry also make it possible for bad actors to cause harm. As a company whose mission is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful, Google is deeply conscious of both the opportunities and risks the internet creates. I'm proud that Google's information services like Search, Gmail, Maps, and Photos provide thousands of dollars a year in value to the average American for free. We feel a deep responsibility to keep the people who use our products safe and secure, and have long invested in innovative tools to prevent abuse of our services. When it comes to privacy, we are committed to keeping your information safe, treating it responsibly, and putting you in control. We continue to make privacy improvements, like the changes I announced earlier this year to keep less data by default, and support the creation of comprehensive federal privacy laws. We are equally committed to protecting the quality and integrity of information on our platforms and supporting our democracy in a nonpartisan way. As just one timely example, our information panels on Google and YouTube inform users about where to vote and how to register. We've also taken many steps to raise up high-quality journalism, from sending 24 billion visits to news websites globally every month, to our recent $1 billion investment in partnerships with news publishers. Since our founding, we've been deeply committed to the freedom of expression. We also feel a responsibility to protect people who use our products from harmful content and to be transparent about how we do that. That's why we set and publicly disclose clear guidelines for our products and platforms, which we enforce impartially. We recognize that people come to our services with a broad spectrum of perspectives, and we are dedicated to building products that are helpful to users of all backgrounds and viewpoints. Let me be clear, we approach our work without political bias, full stop. To do otherwise would be contrary to both our business interests and our mission, which compels us to make information accessible to every type of person, no matter where they live or what they believe. Of course, our ability to provide access to a wide range of information is only possible because of existing legal frameworks like Section 230. The United States adopted Section 230 early in the Internet's history, and it has been foundational to US leadership in the tech sector. It protects the freedom to create and share content while supporting the ability of platforms and services of all sizes to responsibly address harmful content. We appreciate that this committee has put great thought into how platforms should address content. We look forward to having these conversations. As you think about how to shape policy in this important area, I would urge the committee to be very thoughtful about any changes to Section 230 and to be very aware of the consequences those changes might have on businesses and customers. At the end of the day, we all share the same goal: free access to information for everyone and responsible protections for people and their data. We support legal frameworks that achieve these goals. I look forward to engaging with you today about these important issues and answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pakai. Members should be advised at this point that we are unable to make contact with Mr. Mark Zuckerberg. We are told by Facebook staff that he is alone and attempting to connect with this hearing, and that they are requesting a 5-minute recess at this point to see if that connection can be made. I think this is a most interesting development, but we're going to accommodate the request of the Facebook employees and see if within 5 minutes we can make contact and proceed. So at this point, declare a 5-minute recess. You don't have to call the hearing back into order, and we're told that in less than 5 minutes we have success. So, Mr. Zuckerberg, I'm told that we have both video and audio connection. Are you there, sir?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Can hear you fine, and you're now recognized for 5 minutes to summarize your testimony. Welcome.
All right. Thank you, Chairman. I was able to hear the other opening statements. I was just having a hard time connecting myself. All right. So
I know the feeling, Mr. Zuckerberg.
Chairman Wicker, Ranking Member Cantwell, and members of the committee, every day, millions of Americans use the internet to share their experiences and discuss issues that matter to them. Setting the rules for online discourse is an important challenge for our society, and there are principles at stake that go beyond any one platform. How do we balance free expression and safety? How do we define what is dangerous? Who should decide? I don't believe that private companies should be making so many decisions about these issues by themselves. And at Facebook, we often have to balance competing equities. Sometimes the best approach from a safety or security perspective isn't the best for privacy or free expression. So we work with experts across society to strike the right balance. We don't always get it right, but we try to be fair and consistent. The reality is that people have very different ideas and views about where the lines should be. Democrats often say that we don't remove enough content, and Republicans often say we remove too much. I expect that we'll hear some of those criticisms today. And the fact that both sides criticize us doesn't mean that we're getting this right. But it does mean that there are real disagreements about where the limits of online speech should be. And I think that's understandable. People can reasonably disagree about where to draw the lines. That's a hallmark of democratic societies, especially here in the US with our strong First Amendment tradition. But it strengthens my belief that when a private company is making these calls, we need a more accountable process that people feel is legitimate and that gives platforms certainty. At Facebook, we publish our standards and issue quarterly reports on the content that we take down. We launched an independent oversight board that can overturn our decisions, and we've committed to an audit of our content reports. But I believe Congress has a role to play too, in order to give people confidence that the process is carried out in a way that balances society's deeply held values appropriately, and that's why I've called for regulation. Right now, the discussion is focused on Section 230. Some say that ending 230 would solve all of the internet's problems. Others say that it would end the internet as we know it. From our perspective, Section 230 does two basic things. First, it encourages free expression, which is fundamentally important. Without 230, platforms could potentially be held liable for everything that people say. They'd face much greater pressure to take down more content to avoid legal risk. Second, it allows platforms to moderate content. Without 230, platforms could face liability for basic moderation, like removing harassment that impacts the safety of their communities. Now, there's a reason why America leads in technology. Section 230 helped create the internet as we know it. It has helped new ideas get built and our companies to spread American values around the world, and we should maintain this advantage. But the internet has also evolved, and I think that Congress should update the law to make sure that it's working as intended. One important place to start would be making content moderation systems more transparent. Another would be to separate good actors from bad actors by making sure that companies can't hide behind Section 230 to avoid responsibility for intentionally facilitating illegal activity on their platforms. We're open to working with Congress on these ideas and more. I hope the changes that you make will ring true to the spirit and intent of 230. There are consequential choices to make here, and it's important that we don't prevent the next generation of ideas from being built. Now, although this hearing is about content policy, I also want to cover our election preparedness work. Voting ends in 6 days. We're in the midst of a pandemic, and there are ongoing threats to the integrity of this election. Since 2016, Facebook has made major investments to stop foreign interference. We've hired more than 35,000 people to work on safety and security. We've disrupted more than 100 networks coming from Russia, Iran, and China, and more that were misleading people about who they are and what they're doing, including 3 just this week. This is an extraordinary election, and we've updated our policies to reflect that. We're showing people reliable information about voting and results, and we've strengthened our ads and misinformation policies. We're also running the largest voting information campaign in US history. We estimate that we've helped more than 4.4 million people register to vote, and 100,000 people volunteer to be poll workers. Candidates on both sides continue to use our platforms to reach voters. Now, people are rightly focused on the role that technology companies play in our elections. I'm proud of the work that we've done to support our democracy. This is a difficult period, but I believe that America will emerge stronger than ever, and we're focused on doing our part to help.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Zuckerberg, and thanks to all of our witnesses. We will now, I think we're supposed to set the clock to 7 minutes, and I see 5 minutes up there, but somehow we'll keep time, so there we are. Okay. Well, thank you all. Let me start then with Mr. Dorsey. Mr. Dorsey, the committee has compiled dozens and dozens of examples of conservative content being censored and suppressed by your platforms over the last 4 years. I entered these examples into the record on October 1st when the committee voted unanimously to issue the subpoenas. And thank you all 3 again for working with us on the scheduling, alleviating the necessity for actually exercising the subpoenas. Mr. Dorsey, your platform allows foreign dictators to post propaganda typically without restriction, yet you routinely restrict the President of the United States. And here's an example. In March, a spokesman for the Chinese Communist Party falsely accused the U.S. military of causing the coronavirus epidemic. He tweeted, quote, "CDC was caught on the spot. When did patient 0 begin in the U.S.? How many people are infected? What are the names of the hospitals? It might be the U.S. Army who brought the epidemic to Wuhan," and on and on. After this tweet was up for some 2 months, Twitter added a fact-check label to this tweet after being up for 2 months. However, when President Trump tweeted about how mail-in ballots are vulnerable to fraud, a statement that I subscribe to and agree with, a statement that is in fact true, Twitter immediately imposed a fact-check label on that tweet. Mr. Dorsey, how does a claim by Chinese communists that the U.S. military is to blame for COVID remain up for 2 months without a fact check, and the President's tweet about security of mail-in ballots get labeled instantly?
Well, first and foremost, as you mentioned, we did label that tweet. As we think about enforcement, we consider severity of potential offline harm, and we act as quickly as we can. We have taken action against tweets from world leaders all around the world, including the President, and we did take action on that tweet because we saw it. We saw the confusion it might encourage, and we labeled it accordingly. And the goal with our labeling—
You're speaking of the President's tweet?
Yes.
Okay.
The goal of our labeling is to provide more context, to connect the dots so that people can have more information so they can make decisions for themselves. We've created these policies recently. We are enforcing them. There are certainly things that we can do much faster, but generally we believe that the policy was enforced in a timely manner and in the right regard.
And yet you seem to have no objection to a tweet by the Chinese Communist Party saying the U.S. Army brought the epidemic to Wuhan.
Well, we did, and we labeled that tweet,
It
providing
took you
more
2 months to
information.
do so, is that correct?
I'm not sure of the exact time frame, but we can get back to you on that.
So you're going to get back to us as to how a tweet from the Chinese Communist Party falsely accusing the U.S. military of causing the coronavirus epidemic was left up for 2 months with no comment from Twitter, while the President of the United States making a statement about being careful about about ballot security with the mail was labeled immediately. I have a tweet here from Mr. Ajit Pai. Mr. Ajit Pai is the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, and he recounts some 4 tweets by the Iranian dictator Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, which Twitter did not place a public label on. They all 4 of them glorify violence. The first tweet says this, and I quote each time: "The Zionist regime is a deadly, cancerous growth and a detriment to the region. It will undoubtedly be uprooted and destroyed." That's the first tweet. The second tweet: "The only remedy until the removal of the Zionist regime is firm armed resistance." Again, left up without comment by Twitter. The third: "The struggle to free Palestine is jihad in the way of God." I quote that in part for the sake of time. And number 4, "We will support and assist any nation or any group anywhere who opposes and fights the Zionist regime." I would simply point out that these tweets are still up, Mr. Dorsey. And how is it that they are acceptable to be there? I'll ask unanimous consent to enter this tweet from Ajit Pai in the record at this point. That'll be done without objection. How, Mr. Dorsey, is that acceptable based on your policies at Twitter?
Well, we believe it's important for everyone to hear from global leaders. And we have policies around world leaders. We want to make sure that we are respecting their right to speak and to publish what they need. But if there is a violation of our terms of service, we want to label it.
They're still up. Do they violate your terms of service, Mr. Dorsey?
We did not find those to violate our terms of service because we considered them saber rattling, which is part of the speech of world leaders in concert with other countries. Speech against our own people or a country's own citizens, we believe is different and can cause more immediate harm.
Very, very telling information, Mr. Dorsey. Thank you very much. Senator Cantwell, you are recognized.
I think I'm deferring to our colleague, Senator Peters, just because of timing and situation for him.
All right, Senator Peters, are you there?
I am here.
Sir,
I am here.
You are recognized for 7 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ranking Member Cantwell, appreciate your deferral to me. I certainly appreciate that consideration a great deal. Also want to thank each of our panelists here today for coming forward and being a witness, and appreciate all of you accommodating your schedule so that we could have this hearing. My first question is for Mr. Zuckerberg, and I want to start off by saying how much I appreciated our opportunity last night to speak at length on a number of issues. And as I told you last night, I appreciate the Facebook's efforts to assist law enforcement to disrupt a plot to kidnap and then to hold a sham trial and kill our governor, Governor Whitmer. The individuals in that case apparently used Facebook for a broad recruiting effort, but then they actually planned the specifics of that operation off of your platform. My question is, when users reach the level of radicalization that violates your community standards, you often will ban those groups and you then drive them off to other
terrorist organizations. Not only are we not going to show that content, but I think we try to, where we can, highlight information that would be helpful, and I think we try to work with experts on that. I can follow up and get you more information on the scope of those activities and when we invoke that. But I certainly agree with the spirit of the question that this is a good idea and something that we should continue pursuing and perhaps expand.
Well, I appreciate those comments. I'm the ranking member on Senate Homeland Security Committee, and what we're seeing is a rise of violent extremist groups, which is very troubling. And certainly we need to work very closely with you as to how do we disrupt this kind of radicalization, especially folks that are using your platform. So I appreciate the opportunity to work further. And as we talked about last night, you asserted that Facebook is proactively working with law enforcement now to disrupt some of these real world violent attempts that stem from some of that activity that originated your platform. Could you tell me specifically how many threats that you have proactively referred to local or state law enforcement prior to being approached for a preservation request?
Senator, I don't know the number off the top of my head, so I can follow up with you on that. But it is increasingly common that our systems are able to detect when there's potential issues. And over the last 4 years in particular, we've built closer partnerships with law enforcement and the intelligence community to be able to share those kind of signals. So we're doing more of that, including in the case that you mentioned before around the attempted kidnapping of Governor Whitmer. We identified that as a signal to the FBI. I think it was about 6 months ago when we started seeing some suspicious activity on our platform, and there's certainly that's part of our routine and how we operate.
Well, Mr. Zuckerberg, discovery tools and recommendation algorithms that your platforms use does serve up potentially extremist content based on the user profiles of folks. As we seek to understand why membership in these extremist groups is rising, I would hope that your companies are right now engaging in some forensic analysis of membership once you take down an extremist group to take a look at how that happened on your platform. It's certainly going to better inform us as to how we can disrupt this type of recruitment into extremist groups. My question for you, though, is that in 2016, you said, and this was apparently an internal Facebook internal document that was reported by the Wall Street Journal, that said that 64% of members of violent groups became members because of your platform's recommendation. And I'll quote from that report that was reported in the Wall Street Journal. It said, "Our recommendation systems grow the problem." That's clearly very concerning. And I know in response to that report in 2016, you had made changes to your policies, you made changes to some of the algorithms that existed at that time. My question is, have you seen a reduction in your platform's facilitation of extremist group recruitment since those policies were changed?
Senator, I'm not familiar with that specific study, but I agree with the concern. And making sure that our recommendation systems for what groups people are given the opportunity to join is certainly one important vector for addressing this issue. And we've taken a number of steps here, including disqualifying groups from being included in our recommendation system at all if they routinely are being used to share misinformation, or if they have content violations, or a number of other criteria. So I'm quite focused on this. I agree with where you're going with that question. I don't have any data today on the real world impact of that yet, but I think that addressing this upstream is very important.
So I appreciate you agreeing with that and that we need more data. Is it that you don't have the data just at the top of your head, or that it doesn't exist?
Well, Senator, certainly the former, and potentially the latter as well. I think it probably takes some time after we make these changes to be able to measure the impact of it. And I'm not aware of what studies are going on into this. This seems like the type of thing that one would want not just internal Facebook researchers to work on, but also potentially a collaboration with independent academics as well.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, and thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Gardner has also asked to go out of order, and Senator Thune has graciously deferred to him. So, Senator Gardner, you are recognized for 7 minutes, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Thune, for sharing your time, or at least deferring your time to me. And thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, Mr. PJ, thank you very much, and Mr. Dorsey, thank you for being here. Mr. Dorsey, I'm going to direct these first questions to you. Mr. Dorsey, do you believe the Holocaust really happened, yes or no?
Yes.
So you would agree that someone who says the Holocaust may not have happened is spreading misinformation, yes or no?
Yes.
I appreciate your answers on this, but they surprise me and probably a lot of other Coloradans and Americans. After all, Iran's Ayatollah has done exactly this, questioning the Holocaust. And yet his tweets remain unflagged on Twitter's platform. You and I agree that moderating your platform makes sense in certain respects. We don't want the next terrorist finding inspiration on Twitter or any platform for that matter. But you've also decided to moderate certain content from influential world leaders, and I'd like to understand your decisions to do so a little bit better. Can you name any other instance of Twitter hiding or deleting a tweet from heads of state?
Not off the top of my head, but we have many examples across world leaders around the world.
Would you be willing to provide a list of those?
Absolutely.
I know we agree content moderation can have certain upsides like combating terrorism, but Twitter has chosen to approach content moderation from the standpoint of combating misinformation as well. So it's strange to me that you've flagged the tweets from the president, but haven't hidden the Ayatollah's tweets on Holocaust denial or calls to wipe Israel off the map. And that you can't recall off the top of your head hidden or deleted tweets from other world leaders. I would appreciate that list. I think it's important that we all hear that. So that brings my next question to the front. Does Twitter maintain a formal list of certain accounts that you actively monitor for misinformation?
No, and we don't have a policy against misinformation. We have a policy against misinformation in 3 categories, which are manipulated media, public health, specifically COVID, and civic integrity, election interference, and voter suppression. That is all we have policy on for misleading information. We do not have policy or enforcement for any other types of misleading information that you're mentioning.
So somebody denying the murder of millions of people or instigating violence against a country as a head of state is not categorically falling in any of those 3 misinformation or other categories Twitter has?
Not misinformation, but we do have other policies around incitement to violence, which may, some of the tweets that you mentioned or the examples that you're mentioning may fall afoul of. But for misleading information, we're focused on those 3 categories only.
So somebody who denies the Holocaust has happened is not misinformation?
It's misleading information, but we don't have a policy against that type of misleading information.
Millions of people died, and that's not a violation of Twitter. Again, I just don't understand how you can label a president of the United States. Have you ever taken a tweet down from the Ayatollah?
I believe we have, but we can get back to you on it. We've certainly labeled tweets, and I believe we have taken one down as well.
You know, if you said you do not have a list, is that correct? You do not maintain a list?
We don't maintain a list of accounts we watch. We look for reports and issues brought to us, and then we weigh it against our policy and enforce if needed.
You look for reports from your employees or from the
from the people news? From the people using the service.
Right, and then they turn that over to your board of review. Is that correct? Well,
so in some cases algorithms take action. In other cases, humans do. In some cases, it's a pairing of the 2.
There are numerous examples of blue check marks that are spreading false information that aren't flagged. So Twitter must have some kind of list of priority accounts that it maintains. You have the blue check mark list. How do you decide when to flag a tweet? You got into that a little bit. Is there a formal threshold of retweets or likes that must be met before a tweet is flagged?
No.
Twitter can't claim that. I just, with your answers on the Ayatollah and others, I just don't understand how Twitter can claim to want a world of less hate and misinformation while you simultaneously let the kind of content that the Ayatollah has tweeted out flourish on the platform, including from other world leaders. It's no wonder that Americans are concerned about politically motivated content moderation at Twitter, given what we have just said. I don't like the idea of a group of unelected elites in San Francisco or Silicon Valley deciding whether my speech is permissible on their platforms, but I like even less the idea of unelected Washington, D.C. bureaucrats trying to enforce some kind of politically neutral content moderation. So just as we have heard from other panelists, as we're going to hear throughout the day, we have to be very careful and not rush to legislate in ways that stifle speech. You can delete Facebook, turn off Twitter, or try to ditch Google, but you cannot unsubscribe from government censors. Congress should be focused on encouraging speech, not restricting it. The Supreme Court has tried teaching us that lesson time and time again, and the Constitution demands that we remember it. I'm running short on time, so I'm going to very quickly go through another question. One of the core ideas of Section 230's liability protections is this: you shouldn't be responsible for what someone else says on your platform. Conversely, you should be liable for what you say or do on your own platform. I think that's pretty common sense. But courts have not always agreed with this approach. Even Rep. Chris Cox opined in a recent Wall Street Journal op-ed that Section 230 has sometimes been interpreted by courts more broadly than I expected. For example, allowing some websites to escape liability for content they helped create. Mr. Zuckerberg, I have a simple question for you and each of the panelists today quickly. To be clear, I'm not talking about technical tools or operating the platform itself here. I'm purely talking about content. Do you agree that internet platforms should be held liable for the specific content that you yourself create on your own platforms? Yes or no?
Very quickly.
Senator, I think that is reasonable.
Yes or no, Mr. Dorsey? If Twitter creates specific content, should Twitter be liable for that content?
It's reasonable as well.
Mr. Piche, same question to you. Yes or no, should Google be liable for the specific content that it creates?
If we are acting as a publisher, I would say yes.
The specific content that you create on your own platform? Yes.
That seems reasonable.
Thank you. I think one of the other sides of liability questions in regard to the good faith removal provision in Section 230 that we'll get into a little bit more in the private questions. I know I'm out of time. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for giving me this time. Senator Thune, thank you as well. And thanks to the witnesses.
Thank you, Senator Gardner. The ranking member has now deferred to Senator Klobuchar, so Senator, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to note first that this hearing comes 6 days before Election Day, and it makes, I believe we're politicizing, and the Republican majority is politicizing, which should actually not be a partisan topic. And I do want to thank the witnesses here for appearing, but also for the work that they're doing to try to encourage voting and to put out the correct information when the president and others are undermining vote by mail, something we're doing in every state in the country right now. Second point, Republicans failed to pass my Bipartisan Honest Ads Act. And the White House blatantly blocked the bipartisan election security bill that I had with Senator Langford, as well as several other Republicans. And it's one of the reasons I think we need a new president. Third, my Republican colleagues in the Senate, many of them I work with very well in this committee, but we have had 4 years to do something when it comes to antitrust, privacy, local news, a subject that briefly came up, and so many other things. So I'm going to use my time to focus on what I consider, in Justice Ginsburg's words, to be a blueprint for the future. I'll start with you, Mr. Zuckerberg. How many people log into Facebook every day?
Senator, it is more than 2 billion.
Okay. And how much money have you made on political advertisements in the last 2 years?
Senator, I do not know off the top of my head. It is a relatively small part of our revenue.
Okay, small for you, but I think it's 2.2 billion, over 10,000 ads sold since May 2018. Those are your numbers, and we can check them later. Do you require Facebook employees to review the content of each of the political ads that you sell in order to ensure that they comply with the law and your own internal rules?
Senator, we require all political advertisers to be verified before they could run ads. And I believe we do review advertising as well.
But does a real person actually read the political ads that you sell, yes or no?
Senator, I imagine that a person does not look at every single ad. Our systems are a combination of artificial intelligence systems and people. We have 35,000 people who do content and security review for us, but given the massive amount of...
I really just had a straightforward question because I don't think they do. I think the algorithms hit in because I think the ads instantly are placed. Is that correct?
Senator, my understanding of the way the system works is we have computers and artificial intelligence scan everything. And if we think that there are potential violations, then either the AI system will act or it will flag it to the tens of thousands of people who do content review. But
just with all the money you have, you could have a real person review like a lot of the other traditional media organizations do. So another question, when John McCain and I and Senator Warner introduced the Honest Ads Act, we got pushback from your company, others, and you were initially against it. Then we discussed this at a hearing. You're for it. I appreciate that. And have you spent any of the money? I know you spent the most money, Facebook spent the most money ever lobbying last year. Have you spent any of the money trying to change or block the bill?
Senator, no. In fact, I've endorsed it publicly and we've implemented it into our systems, even though it hasn't become law. I'm a big supporter. Have you done anything in the past to try to change it? No. Have you done anything to get it passed? Because we're at a roadblock on it. And I do appreciate that you voluntarily implemented some of it, but have you voluntarily implemented the part of the Honest Ads Act where you fully disclose which groups of people are being targeted by political ads? Senator, we have, I think, industry-leading transparency around political ads, and part of that is showing which audiences, in broad terms, ended up seeing the ads. Of course, getting the right resolution on that is challenging without it becoming a privacy issue, but we've tried to do that and provide as much transparency as we can, and I think we're currently leading in that area. And to your question about how we're... I still have concerns, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but I have such limited time. One of the things that last thing I want to ask you about is divisiveness on the platform. And I know there's been a recent studies have shown that part of your algorithms, they push people towards more polarized content, left, right, whatever. In fact, one of your researchers warned senior executives that our algorithms exploit the human brain's attraction to divisiveness. The way I look at it, more divisiveness, more time on the platform, more time on the platform, the company makes more money. Does that bother you, what it's done to our politics? Senator, I respectfully disagree with that characterization of how the systems work. We design our systems to show people the content that's going to be the most meaningful to them, which is not trying to be as divisive as possible. Most of the content on the systems is not political. It's things like making sure that you can see when your cousin had her baby, or okay. I'm gonna move on to Google here and Mr. Pichai, but I'm telling you right now that that's not what I'm talking about. The cousins and the babies here. I'm talking about conspiracy theories and all the things that I think the senators on both sides of the aisle know what I'm talking about, and I think it's been corrosive. Google, Mr. Pichai. I have not really liked your response to the lawsuit and what's been happening. I think we need a change in competition policy for this country. I hope I'll be able to ask you more about it at the Judiciary Committee.
And I think your response isn't just offensive, it's been defiant to the Justice Department and suits all over the world. You control almost 90% of all general search engine queries, 70% of the search advertising market. Don't you see these practices as anti-competitive?
Senator, we are a popular general purpose search engine. We do see robust competition in many categories of information. And, we invest significantly in R&D. We are innovating. We are lowering prices in all the markets we are operating in. Happy to, engage and discuss it further.
Well, one of your employees testified before the antitrust subcommittee last month, and he suggested that Google wasn't dominant in ad tech, that it was only one of many companies in a highly competitive ad tech landscape. Yet Google has 90% of the publisher ad server market, a product of its DoubleClick acquisition. Does the market sound highly competitive to you when you have 90% of it?
Very brief answer.
Many publishers can use simultaneously many tools. Amazon and Trade Desk alone have grown significantly in the last 2 years. This is a market in which we share majority of our revenue. Our margins are low. We are happy to take feedback here. We are trying to support the publishing industry, but definitely open to feedback and happy to engage and discuss.
Thank you, Mr.
Well,
Picai,
I think
and
you've
thank
gotten
you,
feedback
Senator
from the
Klobuchar.
lawsuit, so I'm looking forward to our next hearing to discuss it more. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Thune, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate you convening the hearing today, which is an important follow-up to the subcommittee hearing that we convened in July on Section 230. Many of us here today, and many of those we represent, are deeply concerned about the possibility of political bias and discrimination by large internet and social media platforms. Others are concerned that even if your actions aren't skewed, that they are hugely consequential for our public debate, yet you operate with limited accountability. Such distrust is intensified by the fact that the moderation practices used to suppress or amplify content remain largely a black box to the public. Moreover, the public explanations given by the platforms for taking down or suppressing content too often seem like excuses that have to be walked back after scrutiny. And due to exceptional secrecy with which platforms protect their algorithms and content moderation practices, it's been impossible to prove one way or another whether political bias exists. So users are stuck with anecdotal information that frequently seems to confirm their worst fears, which is why I've introduced 2 bipartisan bills, the Platform Accountability and Consumer Transparency, or the PACT Act, and the Filter Bubble Transparency Act, to give users, the regulators, and the general public meaningful insight into online content moderation decisions and how algorithms may be amplifying or suppressing information. And so I look forward to continuing that discussion today. My Democrat colleagues suggest that when we criticize the bias against conservatives, that we're somehow working the refs. But the analogy of working the refs assumes that it's legitimate even to think of you as refs. It assumes that you 3 Silicon Valley CEOs get to decide what political speech gets amplified or suppressed, and it assumes that you're the arbiters of truth, or at the very least the publishers making editorial decisions about speech. So yes or no, I would ask this of each of the 3 of you, are the Democrats correct that you all are the legitimate referees over our political speech? Mr. Zuckerberg, are you the ref?
Senator, I certainly think not, and I do not want us to have that role.
Mr. Dorsey, are you the ref?
No.
Mr. Pichai, are you the ref?
Senator, I do think we make content moderation decisions, but we are transparent about it, and we do it to protect users. But we really believe and support maximizing freedom of expression.
I'll take that as 3 no's, and I agree with that. You are not the referees of our political speech. That's why all 3 of you have to be more transparent and fair with your content moderation policies and your content selection algorithms, because at the moment it is, as I said, largely a black box. There's real mistrust among the American people about whether you're being fair or transparent. And this extends to concerns about the kinds of amplification and suppression decisions your platforms may make on Election Day and during the post-election period if the results of the election are too close to call. And so I just want to underscore again for my Democratic friends who keep using this really bad referee analogy Google, Facebook, and Twitter are not the referees over our democracy. Now, second question, the PACT Act, which I referenced earlier, includes provisions to give users due process and an explanation when content they post is removed. So this is, again, a yes or no question. Do you agree that users should be entitled to due process and an explanation when content they post has been taken down? Mr. Zuckerberg.
Senator, I think that that would be a good principle to have.
Thank you. Mr. Dorsey.
Absolutely. We believe in a fair and straightforward appeals process.
Great. Mr. Bashai?
Yes, Senator.
Terrific. Thank you. Mr. Zuckerberg, Mr. Dorsey, your platforms knowingly suppressed or limited the visibility of this New York Post article about the content on Hunter Biden's abandoned laptop. Many in the country are justifiably concerned how often the suppression of major newspaper articles occurs online. And I would say, Mr. Zuckerberg, would you commit to provide for the record a complete list of newspaper articles that Facebook suppressed or limited the distribution of over the past 5 years, along with an explanation of why each article was suppressed or the distribution was limited?
Senator, I can certainly follow up with you and your team to discuss that. This was, we have an independent fact-checking program, as you're saying. We try not to be arbiters of what is true ourselves, but we have partnered with fact checkers around the world to help assess that, to prevent misinformation and viral hoaxes from becoming widely distributed on our platform. And I believe that the information that they fact check and the content that they fact check is public. So I think that there's probably already a record of this that can be reviewed.
Yeah, but if you could do that as it applies to newspapers, that would be very helpful. And Mr. Dorsey, would you commit to doing the same on behalf of Twitter?
We would absolutely be open to it. And we are suggesting going a step further, which is aligned with what you're introducing in the PACT Act, which is much more transparency around our process, the content moderation process, and also the results, the outcomes, and doing that on a regular basis. I do agree and think that builds more accountability, and ultimately that lends itself to more trust.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, very quickly, I don't have a lot of time either, but I often hear from conservative and religious Americans who look at the public statements of your companies, the geographic concentration of your companies, and the political donations of your employees, which often are in the 80 to 90% to Democrat politicians. And you can see why this lack of ideological diversity among the executives and employees of your company could be problematic and may be contributing to some of the distrust among conservatives and Republican users. And so I guess the question that I would ask is, and Mr. Zuckerberg, my understanding is that the person that's in charge of election integrity and security at Facebook is a former Joe Biden staffer. Is there someone that's closely associated with President Trump who's in the same sort of election integrity role at Facebook? And how do you all respond to that argument that there isn't sufficient balance in terms of the political ideology or diversity in your companies? And how do you deal with the lack of sort of trust that creates among conservatives?
Let's see if we can have 3 brief answers there.
Senator, I think having balance is valuable, and we try to do that. I'm not aware of the example that you say of someone in charge of this process who worked for Biden in the past. So we can follow up on that if that's right.
Follow up on the record for the rest of this answer, please, Mr. Zuckerberg. Thank you.
All right.
Mr. Dorsey.
Well, this is why I do believe it's important to have more transparency around our process and our practices. And it's independent of the viewpoints that our employees hold. We need to make sure that we're showing people that we have objective policies and enforcement.
And Mr. Pecan.
In these teams, there are people who are liberal, Republican, libertarian, and so on. We are committed. We consult widely with important third-party organizations across both sites when we develop our policies. And as a CEO, I'm committed to running it without any political bias, but happy to engage more on answer. Nancy.
Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you, Senator Thune. The ranking member has now deferred to Senator Blumenthal. Sir, you are recognized.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the ranking member. I want to begin by associating myself with the very thoughtful comments made by the ranking member as to the need for broader consideration of issues of privacy and competition and local news. They are vitally important. And also with the comments made by my colleagues, Senator Klobuchar, about the need for antitrust review. And I assume we'll be examining some of these topics in November before the Judiciary Committee. I've been an advocate of reform of Section 230 for literally 15 years. When I was Attorney General of the state of Connecticut, I raised this issue of the absolute immunity that no longer seems appropriate. So I really welcome the bipartisan consensus that we're seeing now, that there needs to be constructive review. But frankly, I am appalled that my Republican colleagues are holding this hearing literally days before an election when they seem to want to bully and browbeat the platforms here to try to tilt them toward President Trump's favor. The timing seems inexplicable, except to game the ref in effect. I recognize the referee analogy is not completely exact, but that's exactly what they're trying to do, namely to bully and browbeat these platforms to favor President Trump's tweets and posts. And frankly, President Trump has broken all the norms, and he has put on your platforms potentially dangerous and lethal misinformation and disinformation. I'm going to hold up one of them. This one, as you can see, pertains to COVID. We have learned to live with it, he says, just like we are learning to live with COVID, talking about the flu. We have learned to live with it. In most populations, far less lethal. He has said that children, I would say almost definitely, but almost immune from this disease. He has said about the elections, big problems and discrepancies with mail-in ballots all over the USA. Total on November 3rd. Fortunately, the platforms are acting to label or take down these kinds of posts, but my Republican colleagues have been silent. They've lost their phones or their voices, and the platforms, in my view, have.
Now, we just lost your voice there in mid-sentence, Richard. Let's suspend for just a minute till we get.
I hope you can hear me now.
There we are. Okay, we can hear you now, Senator Blumenthal. Just a start back one sentence before. We had you until then.
I just want to say about this disinformation from the president, there's been deafening silence from my Republican colleagues. And now we have a hearing that is in effect designed to intimidate, bully, browbeat the platforms that have labeled disinformation for exactly what it is. We're on the verge of a massive onslaught on the integrity of our elections. President Trump has indicated that he will potentially interfere by posting disinformation on election day or the morning after. The Russians have begun already interfering in our elections. We've all received briefings that are literally chilling about what they are doing, and the FBI and the CSIS have recently issued public alerts that, quote, foreign actors and cyber criminals likely to spread disinformation regarding 2020 results. They are making 2016 look like child's play in what they are doing. So President Trump and the Republicans have a plan which involves disinformation and misinformation. The Russians have a plan. I want to know whether you have a plan, Facebook, Twitter, Google, a plan.
And change election results. But today, I want to focus my questioning on Mr. Dorsey and on Twitter. Because of the three players before us, I think Twitter's conduct has by far been the most egregious. Mr. Dorsey, does Twitter have the ability to influence elections?
No.
You don't believe Twitter has any ability to influence elections?
No, we are one part of a broad spectrum of communication channels that people have.
So you're testifying to this committee right now that Twitter, when it silences people, when it censors people, when it blocks political speech, that has no impact on elections?
People have choice of other communication channels with which.
Not if they don't hear information. If you don't think you have the power to influence elections, why do you block anything?
Well, we have policies that are focused on making sure that more voices on the platform are possible. We see a lot of abuse and harassment, which ends up silencing people and having them leave from the platform.
All right, Mr. Dorsey, I find your opening questions, your opening answers absurd on their face. But let's talk about the last 2 weeks in particular. As you know, I have long been concerned about Twitter's pattern of censoring and silencing individual Americans with whom Twitter disagrees. But 2 weeks ago, Twitter, and to a lesser extent Facebook, crossed a threshold that is fundamental in our country. 2 weeks ago, Twitter made the unilateral decision to censor the New York Post in a series of 2 blockbuster articles, both alleging evidence of corruption against Joe Biden. The first concerning Ukraine, the second concerning communist China. And Twitter made the decision, number one, to prevent users, any user, from sharing those stories. And number two, you went even further and blocked the New York Post from sharing on Twitter its own reporting. Why did Twitter make the decision to censor the New York Post?
We had a hack materials policy that we.
When was that policy adopted?
In 2018, I believe.
In 2018, go ahead. What was the policy?
So the policy is around limiting the spread of materials that are hacked. We didn't want Twitter to be a distributor for hack materials. We found that the New York Post, because it showed the direct materials, screenshots of the direct materials, and it was unclear how those were attained, that it fell under this policy. Now,
so in your view, if it's unclear the source of a document, and in this instance, the New York Post documented what it said the source was, which it said it was a laptop owned by Hunter Biden that had been turned into a repair store. So they weren't hiding what they claimed to be the source. Is it your position that Twitter, when you can't tell the source, blocks press stories?
No, not at all. Our team made a fast decision. The enforcement action, however, of blocking URLs, both in tweets and in DM, in direct messages, we believe was incorrect. And we changed it.
Today, right now, the New York Post is still blocked from tweeting 2 weeks later.
Yes, they have to log into their account, which they can do at this minute, delete the original tweet, which fell under our original enforcement actions, and they can tweet the exact same material and the exact same article, and it would go through.
So, Mr. Dorsey, your ability is you have the power to force a media outlet. Let's be clear. The New York Post isn't just some random guy tweeting. The New York Post has the 4th highest circulation of any newspaper in America. The New York Post is over 200 years old. The New York Post was founded by Alexander Hamilton. And your position is that you can sit in Silicon Valley and demand of the media that you can tell them what stories they can publish, and you can tell the American people what reporting they can hear. Is that right?
No, this was a, every person, every account, every organization that signs up to Twitter agrees to a terms of service. Terms of service is
so
published.
Media outlets must genuflect and obey your dictates if they wish to be able to communicate with readers. Is that right?
No, not at all. We recognized an error in this policy, and specifically the enforcement.
You're still blocking their posts. You're still blocking their posts. Right now, today, you're blocking their posts.
We're not blocking the post. Anyone can tweet.
Can the New York Post post on their Twitter account?
If they go into their account.
No is your answer to that. No, unless they genuflect and agree with your dictates. Let me ask you something. You claimed it was because of a hacked materials policy. I find that facially highly dubious and clearly employed in a deeply partial way. Did Twitter block the distribution of the New York Times' story a few weeks ago that purported to be based on copies of President Trump's tax returns?
We didn't find that a violation of our terms of service in this policy in particular, because it was reporting about the material. It wasn't distributing the material.
Okay, well, that's actually not true. They posted what they purported to be original source materials, and federal law, federal statute makes it a crime, a federal felony, to distribute someone's tax returns against their knowledge. So that material was based on something that was distributed in violation of federal law, and yet Twitter gleefully allowed people to circulate that. But when the article was critical of Joe Biden, Twitter engaged in rampant censorship and silencing.
And again, we recognized errors in that policy. We changed it within 24 hours. This is.
But you're still blocking the New York Post. You haven't changed it.
We have changed it. They can log into their account, delete the original tweet. That was
you forced a Politico reporter to take down his post about the New York Post as well. Is that correct?
Within that 24-hour period, yes. But as the policy has changed, anyone can tweet.
So Twitter takes the view you can censor the New York Post, you can censor Politico, presumably you can censor the New York Times or any other media outlet. Mr. Dorsey, who the hell elected you and put you in charge of what the media are allowed to report and what the American people are allowed to hear? And why do you persist in behaving as a Democratic super PAC, silencing views to the contrary of your political beliefs?
Let's give Mr. Dorsey a few seconds to answer that, and then we'll have to conclude this segment.
Well, we're not doing that, and this is why I opened this hearing with calls for more transparency. We realize we need to earn trust more. We realize that more accountability is needed to show our intentions and to show the outcomes.
Thank you, Senator.
So I hear the concerns and acknowledge them, but we want to fix it with more transparency.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. The ranking member has deferred now to Senator Schatz, who joins us remotely. Sir, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, ranking member. This is an unusual hearing at an unusual time. I have never seen a hearing so close to an election on any topic, let alone on something that is so obviously a violation of our obligation under the law and the rules of the Senate to stay out of electioneering. We never do this, and there is a very good reason that we don't haul people before us to yell at them for not doing our bidding during an election. It is a misuse of taxpayer dollars. What's happening here is a scar on this committee and the United States Senate. What we are seeing today is an attempt to bully the CEOs of private companies into carrying out a hit job on a presidential candidate by making sure that they push out foreign and domestic misinformation meant to influence the election. To our witnesses today, you and other tech leaders need to stand up to this immoral behavior. The truth is that because some of my colleagues accuse you, your companies, and your employees of being biased or liberal, you have institutionally bent over backwards and overcompensated. You've hired Republican operatives, hosted private dinners with Republican leaders, and in contravention of your terms of service, given special dispensation to right-wing voices and even throttled progressive journalism. Simply put, the Republicans have been successful in this play. And so during one of the most consequential elections in American history, my colleagues are trying to run this play again, and it is an embarrassment. I have plenty of questions for the witnesses on Section 230, on antitrust, on privacy, on anti-Semitism, on their relationship with journalism, but we have to call this hearing what it is. It's a sham. And so for the first time in my 8 years in the United States Senate, I'm not going to use my time to ask any questions because this is nonsense. And it's not going to work this time. This play my colleagues are running did not start today. And it's not just happening here in the Senate. It is a coordinated effort by Republicans across the government. Last May, President Trump issued an executive order designed to narrow the protections of Section 230 to discourage platforms from engaging in content moderation on their own sites. After it was issued, President Trump started tweeting that Section 230 should be repealed, as if he understands Section 230. In the last 6 months, President Trump has tweeted repeal Section 230 5 times, in addition to other tweets in which he's threatened the tech companies. A few weeks later, President Trump withdrew the nomination of FCC Commissioner Mike O'Reilly. Republican Commissioner O'Reilly questioned the FCC's authority to regulate under Section 230, and the statute is not unclear on this. President Trump then nominated Nathan Symington, who was the drafter of NTIA's petition to the FCC regarding Section 230. And Republican senators have enthusiastically participated. Since June of this year, 6 Republican-only bills have been introduced, all of which threaten platforms' ability to moderate content on their site. And as the election draws closer, this Republican effort has become more and more aggressive. September 23rd, DOJ unveiled its own Section 230 draft legislation that would narrow the protections under the current law and discourage platforms from moderating content on their own site. September 14th and October 1st, respectively, Senators Hawley and Kennedy tried to pass their Republican-only Section 230 bills via live unanimous consent. Now, what that means is they went down to the floor and without a legislative hearing, without any input from Democrats at all, they tried to pass something so foundational to the internet unanimously without any discussion and any debate. On the same day as Senator Kennedy's UC attempt, Senator Wicker forced the Commerce Committee, without any discussion or negotiation beforehand, to vote on subpoenaing the CEOs of Twitter, Facebook, and Google to testify. That's why we're here today. 2 weeks later, on October 14th, Justice Clarence Thomas, on his own, issued a statement that appeared to support the narrowing of the court's interpretation on Section 230. The very next day, the FCC chairman, Ajit Pai, announced that the FCC would seek to clarify the meaning of Section 230. On that day, Senator Graham announced that the Judiciary Committee would vote to subpoena the tech companies over the content moderation. And the context of this, in addition to everything, is that Senator Cruz is on Maria Bartiromo talking about a blockbuster story from the New York Post. Senator Hawley is on Fox and on the Senate floor. And the Commerce Committee itself is tweeting out a campaign-style video that sort of alarmingly says Hunter Biden's emails, tech censorship. On October 21st, Senator Hawley reattempted to pass his bill on Section 230 via UC, again without going through any committee markup or vote. And on Friday, Senator Graham announced that the CEOs of Facebook and Twitter would testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee on November 17th. This is bullying, and it is for electoral purposes. Do not let the United States Senate bully you into carrying the water for those who want to advance misinformation. And don't let the specter of removing Section 230 protections or an amendment to antitrust law or any other kinds of threats cause you to be a party to the subversion of our democracy. I will be glad to participate in good faith bipartisan hearings on these issues when the election is over. But this is not that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Schatz. Next is Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I'm not here to bully you today, and I am certainly not here to read any kind of political statement right before an election. To me, this hearing is not a sham. I am here to gain some clarity on the policies that you use. I am here to look at your proposals for more transparency, because your platforms have become an integral part of our democratic process for both candidates, but also more importantly for our citizens as well. Your platforms also have enormous power to manipulate user behavior and to direct content and to shape narratives. Mr. Dorsey, I heard your opening statement, I've read it. You also tweeted that the concept of good faith is what's being challenged by many of you here today. Some of you don't trust we're acting in good faith. That's the problem I want to focus on solving. So Mr. Dorsey, why should we trust you with so much power? In other words, why shouldn't we regulate you more?
Well, the suggestions we're making around more transparency is how we want to build that trust. We do agree that we should be publishing more of our practice of content moderation. We've made decisions to moderate content. We've made decisions to moderate content to make sure that we are enabling as many voices on our platform as possible. And I acknowledge and completely agree with the concerns that it feels like a black box, and anything that we can do to bring transparency to it, including publishing our policies, our practices, answering very simple questions around how content is moderated, and then doing what we can around the growing trend of algorithms moderating more of this content. As I said, this one is a tough one to actually bring transparency to. Explainability in AI is a field of research, but it is far out. And I think a better opportunity is giving people more choice around the algorithms they use, including people to turn off the algorithms completely, which is what we're attempting to do. So
right, but you can understand the concerns that people have when they see that what many consider you're making value judgments on what's going to be on your platforms. You say users can report content and then you take action, but certainly you can understand that people are very concerned. They're very worried about what they see as manipulation on your part. And to say you're going to have more transparency and yeah, that's, sir, I would say with respect, I don't think that's enough just to say you're going to have that transparency there and you're not influencing people, because as any time a free press is blocked on both sides. What we would view in the political world as both sides here, when views aren't able to be expressed, that does have a huge amount of influence.
I completely understand, and I agree that it's not enough. I don't think transparency alone addresses these concerns. I think we have to continue to push for a more straightforward and fast and efficient appeals process. And I do believe we need to look deeply at algorithms and how they're used and how people have choice on how to use those algorithms or whether they use them.
But ultimately, somebody makes a decision. Where does the buck stop? With the algorithms? You know, where does the buck stop? Who's going to make a value judgment? Because in my opinion, it is a value judgment.
Well, ultimately, I'm accountable to all the decisions that the company makes, but we want to make sure that we're providing clear frameworks that are objective and that can be tested, and that we have multiple checkpoints associated with them so that we can learn quickly if we're doing something in error.
And when your company amplifies some content over others, is it fair for you to have legal protections for your actions?
We believe so. Keep in mind, a lot of our algorithms recommending content is focused on saving people time. So we're ranking things that the algorithms believe people would find most relevant, most valuable in the time.
But it's your value judgment on what those people would find most relevant.
No, it's not a value judgment. It's based on engagement metrics. It's based on who you follow. It's based on activity you take on the network.
Mr. Zuckerberg, with your ever-expanding content moderation policies, are you materially involved in that content?
Senator, yes, I spend a meaningful amount of time on making sure that we get our content policies and enforcement right.
Okay, thank you. What, if any, changes do you think should be made to Section 230 to address the specific concerns regarding content moderation that you've heard so far this morning?
Senator, I would outline a couple. First, I agree with Jack that increasing transparency into the content moderation process would be an important step for building trust and accountability. One thing that we already do at Facebook is every quarter we issue a transparency report where for each of the 20 or so categories of harmful content that we are trying to address, so terrorism, child exploitation, incitement of violence, pornography, different types of content, we issue a report on how we're doing, what the prevalence of that content is on our network, and what percent of it our systems are able to take down before someone even has to report it to us, and what the precision is, and and basically how accurate our systems are at dealing with it, and getting to the point where everyone across the industry is reporting on a baseline like that. I think would be valuable for people to have these discussions, not just about anecdotes of, okay, I saw a piece of content and I'm not necessarily sure I agree with how that was moderated. It would allow the conversation to move to data so that way we can understand how these platforms are performing overall and hold them accountable.
Thank you.
At issue with your answer, I think, would be the time involved, that it wouldn't be an immediate response to have that conversation, as you call it. I hope that all three of you gentlemen can answer that question in written questions. So my time is up. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. I appreciate that. We are going to take now Senator Cantwell's questioning, after which we are going to accommodate our witnesses with a 5-minute recess. So, Senator Cantwell, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Surely can.
And can you see me this time?
We can now see you, yes.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is such an important hearing. I agree with many of the statements my colleagues have had, that this hearing didn't need to take place at this moment, that the important discussion about how we keep a thriving internet economy and how we continue to make sure that hate speech and misinformation is taken down from the web is something that would probably better been done in January than now. But here we are today, and we've heard some astounding things that I definitely must refute. First of all, I'm not going to take lightly anybody who tries to undermine mail-in voting. Mail-in voting in the United States of America is safe. The state of Washington, the state of Oregon have been doing it for years. There is nothing wrong with our mail-in system. So I think that there'll be secretaries of state, there'll be our law enforcement agencies who've worked hard with state election officials, and others who will be talking about how this process works and how we're going to fight to protect it. I'm also going to not demean an organization just because they happen to be headquartered in the state of Washington or to have business there. That somebody claims that just because the geography of a company somehow makes it uber political for one side of the aisle or another, I seriously doubt. I know that because I see many of you coming to the state of Washington for Republican fundraisers with these officials. I know you know darn well that there are plenty of Republicans that work in high-tech firms. So the notion that somehow these people are crossing the aisle because of something and creating censorship, the notion that free speech is about the ability to say things, and it doesn't take, well, maybe we need to have a history lesson from high school again, but yes, free speech means that people can make outrageous statements about their beliefs. So I think that the CEOs are telling us here what their process is for taking down healthcare information that's in fact, that's not true, that is a threat to the public, and information that is a threat to our democracy. That is what they're talking about. So I want to make it clear that this hearing could have happened at a later date, and I don't appreciate the misinformation that is coming across today that is trying to undermine our election process. It is safe. It is the backbone of what distinguishes America from other countries in the world. We do know how to have a safe and fair election. And one of the ways that we're doing that is to have these individuals work with our law enforcement entities. My colleague, Gary Peters, made it very clear. They successfully helped stop a threat on the governor of Michigan. And why? Because they were working with them to make sure that information was passed on. So this is what we're talking about. We're talking about whether we're going to be on the side of freedom and information and whether we're going to put our shoulder to the wheel to continue to make sure that engine is there, or whether we're going to prematurely try to get rid of 230 and squash free speech. And so I want to make sure that we continue to move forward. So Mr. Zuckerberg, I'd like to turn to you because there was a time where there was great concern about what happened in Myanmar, about the government using information against a Muslim minority, and you took action and reformed the system. And just recently, in September, Facebook and Twitter announced they had suspended networks accounts linked to various organizations and for use of techniques laundering Russian-backed websites, accounts, and derisive propaganda that we associated with state-run attempts to interfere in our elections. So could you please, Mr. Zuckerberg, talk about what you are doing to make sure state-run entities don't interfere in U.S. elections?
Yes, thank you, Senator. Since 2016, we've been building up some very sophisticated systems to make sure that we can stop foreign interference in elections, not just in the US, but all around the world. And a lot of this involves building up AI systems to identify when clusters of accounts aren't behaving in the way that a normal person would. They're behaving as fake accounts in some coordinated way. A lot of this is also about forming partnerships. The tech companies here today work more closely together to share signals about what's happening on the different platforms to be able to combat these threats, as well as working more closely with law enforcement and intelligence communities around the world. And the net result of that is that over the last few years, we've taken down more than 100 networks that were potentially attempting to spread misinformation or interfere. A lot of them were coming from Russia or Iran, a growing number from China as well. And at this point, I'm proud that our company and as well as the others in the industry, I think, have built systems that are very effective at this. We can't stop countries like Russia from trying to interfere in an election. Only the U.S. government can really push back and with the appropriate leverage to do that. But we have built up systems to make sure that we can identify much faster when they're attempting to do that. Should give the American people